Hey there. I really think that every homeschooling parent should read the book Educated by Tara Westover. It's basically her life story. And one reason that you should read it is because I think it would help you to understand why perhaps some people have such a hostile response when they hear families are homeschooling. And maybe this isn't as popular now because so many families were forced to homeschool, but I do think that hostility can still be there. And sometimes it surprises people. Like, why are people so angry when they hear that I'm planning to homeschool my child? And reading her story, I mean, maybe that is what people have in mind. Her story, in many ways, probably has some of those worst case scenario elements, like, she would say that she was educationally neglected, didn't really have enough exposure to different types of people, had a lot of trouble adjusting to being an adult and navigating a path to becoming a self-sufficient adult. So those challenges are real. They're obviously there in her story. And so maybe just reading it would help you to understand why some people might respond so negatively. And I don't know if that would help you communicate with them, but it could just help you in understanding that. And then, second, another reason to read it is that she is just such a great writer. Her story is so riveting. I don't want to give too much of it away, but she just had so many wild things happen to her. It's shocking. And some of the shocking things are really sad. But she's just such a vivid writer. And so she really paints these great pictures and she captures these moments that I'm sure she totally acknowledges that they are wild too. So it's just an interesting read. It's an easy to just become fascinated by her story. And so that's another reason why you should read it. And then third, it's not so tied to the homeschooling aspect of her life. Tara was homeschooled all the way from kindergarten through high school. She never went to public school, although her older siblings had. And she, I think, is the youngest of six. So one big theme or aspect of her story is that it's the story of her experience living in a family that was led by a man with significant mental health problems and how that affected her entire life. So her father, she later realized, and even her mother acknowledged, that he does have bipolar disorder. And so he had been very enamored, very much caught up in speculations on how Revelation was going to play out and how his family needed to prepare for that. He had a lot of anti-government sentiment, was very opposed to traditional or Western medicine. And these things, and then in combination with his bouts of depression, it just characterized what her childhood would be like. And I think that was really interesting to explore. And I would say, most people aren't going to have that experience, but she describes her story in such a way it really makes you empathize with her. And I do feel like a great lesson in that is just how little patience people are going to have with you if you don't get help for your problems. And in this case, she's the grown child of somebody who she would acknowledge he had a real mental health problem. But I think that at the point she was at when she wrote her book, this is after years of seeing him never get help, never have any humility that he needed help. And if anything, when he's challenged, he just doubles down on believing he's in the right. And her mom never really stepped in enough to challenge that. And wow, it's really sad to see how much bitterness that created in her. I feel like any sense of trying to be understanding about his problems, it was just gone by the time, she was in later adulthood, and just nothing ever changed. And I think that's a really great lesson to take away, that whether your problem is like, alcoholism, or maybe a tendency towards depression, or something, or maybe even something physical, like it's going to be a natural response for many people to just be done at a certain point if you don't get the help you need. And that's sad to see. I think basically right now their relationship is one where she doesn't talk to him at all, and it just felt necessary at a certain point to make a break. So that is fascinating to explore. Maybe that's kind of like a cautionary tale. And then last, like, as far as the homeschooling aspect, and her basically claiming through her story that she was educationally neglected, like she didn't have the basic skills to navigate, a viable path in adulthood. And she had to really fight to do that herself. Just on her own, she had to get out the books and pursue help and study. And I think that's something to recognize and acknowledge. I think most, like the vast majority of homeschooling families aren't going to do that to their children. They want their children to have open doors and open opportunities, and they want to provide them with a foundation of skills that can serve them in many different ways. And I don't think that is going to be the norm, where they're just going to leave the kid to themselves and not care if they're ignorant about some basic facts in history. Like in the book, she does share how she was just unaware of some real significant events in history through not being educated in a systematic way. So most parents who homeschool are not setting out to have that for their child. But I think something that's a really important takeaway in the book is that her family wasn't planning to do that either. Like in the beginning of their homeschooling with the older children, I guess the parents would say something like, we're homeschooling so we could educate better than the public schools. And I guess their mom was very diligent to like have them do certain things in curriculum and make sure they were on track. But then just through a series of life events, and some of which were physical injuries, and just the mom wasn't as capable, and maybe too, like they just had drifted. So eventually they stopped saying that altogether. Like they stopped even talking about it. And towards the end, it even seemed like they were against having her study at all. Like it was just so, their priorities shifted. And I think that's something to acknowledge. Like, again, most families aren't going to be that extreme, but maybe in your homeschooling life, or over raising many children over a few decades, like you might not be in the same position that you were when you started. Maybe things are going to be more difficult, or something came up, or you're stretched in certain ways. And I think it's good to have like a check-in with yourself. Like, are you providing what you initially thought you wanted to provide for your child? And if it's something where, okay, maybe your goals really weren't realistic in the beginning, okay, fine. It's fine to change goals. But yeah, if it's like a significant, like you're not even accomplishing what you would want to do as a bare minimum, that would be good to readjust and reassess and think, well, maybe do I need help, or do I need to change the schooling situation? Like you should have that desire to self-reflect, because I think what comes through this story too is just somebody who is pretty, I mean, I guess she never says it so directly that she's so bitter about her childhood or anything like that. But yeah, you really get that feeling of like she is, by writing the book and putting a lot of these painful memories on display and portraying her parents in not a great light. I mean, there are some depictions where, I mean, you can't help but come away from the sense that like her dad is this bully who's like pathetic and deluded, and that her mom is just totally ineffective and just kind of delusional herself. Like I just feel like any parent doesn't want their child to have that perspective on their childhood. And even though it's an extreme example, I just think if we could all just take a moment to yeah, just think about the importance of listening to the concerns of our adult children, to reassessing whether we're really doing what we intended to when we set out on this amazing goal of homeschooling and home educating, directing our child's education, and just be willing to course correct if necessary. So altogether, it's also something to recognize that while this isn't going to be the experience of most people, that there are some children out there, right, who I think many of us would agree, like, they aren't really being given like a basic, maybe like connection to a community, or like basic skills with which they need to navigate in this world. And I don't think any of us would want that to happen, where like homeschooling or our beliefs or goals are hindering children, like to such a significant degree. So that's just worth exploring. And in the book, she doesn't call for some like action or legislation or anything like that to help children like her who kind of get maybe too isolated or too just overlooked. But after you read the book, I mean, it's definitely in your mind, like, what do you do? Or if you notice some of these problems happening in another family, or, maybe your own family, I don't know. But like, what would be a good course of action? On one hand, I wonder if there's anything that can be done, because in her situation, the dad seems to have a bona fide mental illness, which I think, I didn't look into it too much, but I believe that part of the disorder is you don't believe you have a disorder. So you don't believe you have a problem. Well, yeah, there's only so much other people can do in that scenario. And in her book, though, she did really appreciate those people who took time for her, who showed compassion, who helped her navigate things, even if it was financial, like her dental work that needed to be done. And maybe if they were just patient and didn't assume something bad about her because she didn't really understand certain things. So that was something to appreciate, that by being a kind person who might not be so quick to judge harshly, that could go a long way. Altogether, though, it's a really well-written book, and I would hope that one day the family could mend things so that they could at least be on speaking terms, because that is a painful break to watch happen. I'm sure that that's not something the parents ever wanted to have happen. So maybe the story's not done yet. Those are my thoughts. God bless. Have a great day.